Hey guys, welcome to my MithrilJS tutorial, and today I'm going to be showing you how to develop an SPA using Mithril to retrieve information from an API to display the users on the left hand side and the posts on the right hand side. And then I'll also show you how we can maintain communication between the components to have this sort of effect, whereby when you click on a user, it displays it in the center using MithrilJS. Welcome. Let's get cracking. We're gonna go down the route of the smart and dumb components. So a component, what is that essentially, and what is a smart and dumb component? A component ideally is a part of your web page or your web application that is taken out on its own and is made as a small unit that constitutes the larger whole of the project. In other words, for this context here that we can see, on the left hand side we have the users, and this is the user component. On the right hand side we have the posts, and that's the post component. And in the center here we have the selected user. That would be the user component, right? So what I've done here is that I've split this page into 3 parts, okay? So this is what we're going to be doing. Now, smart and dumb components. The smart components are those components that are responsible for making requests to an API, pulling them in, modifying the data as well for the rest of the application or for a small subset of components. And then the dumb components are ideally just responsible for just retrieving the data, and displaying it. That's essentially what a dumb component is. So smart component are responsible for making all the requests, handling everything else, whereas the dumb components are responsible for just retrieving or being, they're responsible for retrieving the data and spitting it out onto the page. I'll show you anyway, but we're gonna let's get cracking anyway. I've been talking for 2 minutes. So here we are. This is what it looks like. We're going to be using the ES modules on the browser. So that by that I mean that in my index.js file, for example, I can import other JavaScript files here, right? So I'm gonna delete this all. In fact, I'm gonna delete the whole app. Move that to trash, and let's get started. Let me close this file as well. Don't save. There we go. So let's get started. So I'm gonna create a new file called index.html, and what I'm gonna do is I'm going to, because of time, I'm going to just quickly copy and paste this in here. So in here, the typical HTML head, title, the meta tags, along with the link for the CSS, as well as the body which our application will be running in. And then we're going to be including MithrilJS CDN. I'll probably create another tutorial to show you how to include this in Webpack. And then I'm also saying, okay, well, I want to include an index.js file, and this will be using the browser modules, ES modules. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an index.js file here. There we go. And I'm just going to do a console log and say, hello, guys. And I'm going to save this page as well. And if I go inside my browser and look inside, ignore all of that. Hello, guys, is there. Now it's saying that I have an error here, which is the style.css. So I'm going to create that style.css file, and because of time, also I'm going to copy and paste some code that I already have set up. Okay. Now if I refresh this page, no errors at all. Everything is fine, and we're good to go. So where do we start? Well, first off with MithrilJS, as I said, if you're coming from using the React. From React, ideally, remember you'd import the React DOM, and then you do render, and then you say, okay, document.getElementById, and then you'd pass in your app component, right, like this, like that, right? So that's what you do, and your app component would be up here like this, right? Like that, and then you return some nice data here to say, I don't know, let's just try this. Let's say hello there, like that, right? Now For Mithril, it's a bit different in that number one, you'd use a mount. So you're basically saying, okay, Mithril, I want to mount into my document body. In this case, we could do document. Basically, you choose the element that you want to mount your Mithril application into. In this scenario, I want to mount it into the body here, right? And then I'm saying, okay, I want to mount my app component. Now my app component here, in Mithril's terms, would return an object that would contain a key of view, like this. And I would return the M object. If you don't know how this works, you can check my previous tutorials on Mithril components. And I would basically say, okay, I want to create a class, an HTML DOM element, right? I want to be able to do that, and I will give it a class called app, like this. And then inside here, I also want to create a list of elements inside this app div element, right? So first of all, I just want to add a p tag in here, and I'll just say users component goes here, and I'm gonna paste that. I'm gonna basically paste that down here, and I'm also going to say user component goes here, and for the last one, it will be posts component goes here. Now, if I actually just refresh this, you'll see already, based on the CSS that I've added, we have the users component goes here, the user component goes here, and the post components goes here, right? Now, let's actually get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some files here. The first one being posts.js, and that will be responsible for handling the posts. Then I will also add user.js, which will be responsible for displaying the user, and then users.js, and that will be responsible for showing the list of users, right? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly start off by implementing the users.js file. I'm going to implement this. I'm going to say, okay, export default function. Now, you don't have to do export default. What you could do is export const users component. Okay, in fact, let's go down that route, right? And that in itself will be a function that returns, a view function as well, and that will return a class, a div element with the class of users. Okay, and I'll just say hello world. Okay, now I'm going to import that. Let me just close the posts and the user. I'm going to import the users component into my app component, and I simply do that by just saying, okay, well, import users component from users.js, and then inside this side that says users components goes here, I'll just simply put users component, and if I refresh this page, you will see hello world. There we go, and it's picked up on the styling. Then I will move on and create the posts as well, and I'll probably just, for the sake of time, just copy and paste this into here, and I'll say, okay, posts component, and I'll create a class called posts, and I'll say hello world as well. And if I refresh it, you will see, oops, lastly, if I just import the posts here, posts component, and I integrate that into here like this, right? There we go. Oops, it seems like I have an error somewhere, and that is because I did not change this to posts, and there we go. So we have hello world, we have hello world here, we have user component goes here. Let's do this one as well. We just say, okay, export const user component equals function, and basically the same sort of syntax or code here as well. And I'll just call this user. Yep. So with all of that being said, done, let's see what this will look like. So I've done it again. Look at that. I needed to import the user component in here. Okay, so user component, and then here we are. So hello world, hello world, hello world. So that's all in there. That's all well and good. So remember, I said that there's a smart component that deals with handling the request and everything else, and you have the dump components that will be responsible for retrieving data and sending it back out. Now, in this case, what we're seeing here is that the app component is actually going to play as the smart component, and it will retrieve the API data, and it will pass that data into the users component, into the posts component as well. We'll talk about the user component soon. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another method in here called onInit, and this is a lifecycle hook, just as you have in React, well, back then anyway, before the hooks came into play. We used to have components did mount, right? Another set called, I think, component did on mount, I think, and component did update, all of those hooks. And in Angular, the equivalent would be ng on init, ng after view init, ng after content child init, I believe. So with all of this being said, right, in Mithril you have on init, which is basically saying, okay, when this component has initialized and the virtual DOM is ready to go, I'm basically saying, okay, well, once this component is initialized, I want to fetch my users, and this is how I'm going to do it here. So I'm going to say, okay, well, let me first make my requests, right? So I'll basically do it by doing this. I'll make my request. So I'd say, okay, well, function load, or I'll call it fetch users, and all they'll be responsible for doing is making the request. So I'd say, okay, Mithril, if that's all right, dot request, and I'm gonna pass in an object that takes the URL, and that URL I'm gonna just copy and paste that because of time. I'm gonna be taking this from an API called JSON placeholder.typicode.com/users. And once I've retrieved that, then I would say, okay, then get the users, and let's have a look. So I'm going to say, okay, I've gotten the users now, but how do I initialize it? I would initialize this by just calling this function right here. So fetch users. So basically I'm saying, okay, once this app component has initialized, fetch the users. Okay, and fetch the users function invokes this request and says, okay, retrieve this URL, retrieve the data from this URL, and then retrieve the users and just log them. I'm also just going to be a little extra by saying, okay, let me add the method as well in here to define this as a get method. Now, when I take a look in my logs, you actually see the array of the users. Okay, so that's the users there. And then I'm going to create a model up here that is responsible for, or that will be responsible for holding all of that data. So I'm going to have one key of info that will hold the posts. I'm going to have another key value pair that would hold the URI, so I don't have to repeat myself, which we'll come to in a second. I'll have the user that's been selected, which would be null in this case. And then I'd also have the users as well, which would just be a blank array. Now, because we're going to be retrieving posts from this same endpoint, I don't want to have to copy and paste this again. So I'll just place this up here. And all I'll simply do is I'll say, okay, well, I want to use model.uri and then /users, and it will make that call. And if I refresh my page now, you'll see that it still works, it still pulls the users in. Now I want to also pull in the posts, so I'll just say function fetch posts, and pretty much like what I did above up here. Okay, just do the same thing. There we are. And I'll just change this to posts, and then I'll just invoke this function here. There we go. So get the posts and get the users. And if I do a refresh, you see I have 100 posts here. Let's just, because of time, and we don't want to do too much here with the posts. What we're going to do is we're actually going to just slice this number of posts here. So I'm going to quickly say, okay, model.posts, right, equals posts.slice, and I'm gonna say, okay, start from the first index and I want you to take out 10. Now, if I just show you what this will look like here in a second, we'll see. So I'm going to add m.redraw because Mithril would have retrieved the data, but it needs to redraw for it to reflect the data that has changed. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. What we're going to do with the posts first, though, is we're going to pass the model posts into the posts component by adding a second argument and saying, okay, posts colon model.posts. This is the equivalent to React components being like this: posts component, and then I have posts, and then that would be your data, right? It's the equivalent as well in Angular, where you'd have app posts, and then you'd have this in here, and then you do posts like that, right? That is the equivalent in Angular. In this instance, in Mithril, it is simply the M function that takes the post component, and then you pass in the posts and the model posts. So that's how that would work. Okay, now if I just refresh this page, everything is working fine. I'm going to be focusing now on the posts component just to display it. Remember I said that the post component is a DOM component, so is the user component and the users component. So let's go into the posts component. Now, how would I be able to retrieve the posts that I've just passed in? I'd simply just take a look at what is passed into the view function for my component. So I'll call this vnode, then I'll do a quick console log in here, and you will see in here my vnode in post.js line 4, which is over here. My vnode contains attrs, which stands for attributes, and in the attributes that I have passed down to it, I have passed down an attribute called posts that contains the array. So what we're going to do is we're going to quickly just pull out the attrs key, and then I'm going to say, okay, well, I want to quickly display a pre-tag, and I want to display all my information inside of it. So attrs.posts null 2. So indent by 2 spaces. Don't use any of the don't use any of I don't want to display any other tabs or anything like that in the midsection here. All I need is to display my posts and indent the data, make it pretty with 2 spaces indentation, and there you go. That is the data coming in, and I've sliced it down to 10. I've taken out 10. So this is what it's looking like at the moment. Now I can do the exact same thing for the users, and you'll see here wonderful stuff as well. Users, and I'll just say attrs users, and in the index.js, as I mentioned before, right, I would simply just retrieve that data by doing first off m.redraw because I know that I'm gonna have to update the component again. And then I'd say model.users equals users, and that's it. So that's essentially it. And then I'm gonna pass it down in here, users, model.users, and there we are. Now if I go back to my users.js file, what you're going to see here again is that I'm retrieving the ATTRS users, and if I do a console log actually of the v node, which I'm retrieving already, you will already, oh sorry, yeah, ATTRS, let's just comment that out for now. But what you're going to see here on the left hand side is, coming from the left hand side is this, ATTRS users, a blank array, nothing inside it at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to mimic it like the posts component, and there we are. Can you see the name of the users there? ID, name, username, email, address, phone, website, company, etc. So these are DOM components that are only going to be responsible for displaying data. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do now. So we finally managed to get a hold of that, which is absolutely wonderful. And we're gonna loop through all of these and display only the name. So like you would in either Angular, or even not even with Angular, actually with React, you would loop through the list of users. So you'd basically say ATTRS. Sorry, actually we'll create a const here and call this users, and we'll say if ATTRS.users exists, then users will be ATTRS.users. Otherwise, if it isn't, then it'll just be a blank array. Okay, or we could even better still just do it like this: ATTRS.users, and if that's null, it doesn't contain anything, then just give it a blank array. And then in here I'll just say, okay, well, users.map user, and then I want to return m. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I hope you're following. And I'll say, okay, well, users, create a class called users_1, and then the second argument will be the user.name. Now if I refresh this, you'll see it only displays the names of the users. Voila. Okay, just close that. So we have the users, there we are. Now let's go to the posts, because we're going to do the same thing as well, right? So in the in the posts, we'll do the same thing. Posts, just copy and paste that here and here, and we'll say, okay, posts.map, and we're looping through every single post, and we'll call this post__1, and we'll say display only the post body for now, and you see it on the right hand side. Oops. Let's see what the problem is. Okay, PostJS does not provide an exported name called. That's correct, because I haven't changed it yet. There we go. Now that's all displaying as it should. Beautiful stuff. Now all we need to do to get it to look like the first image, the first display that you saw earlier, was pass in an array and we're gonna quickly just pass in a h2 that displays the title of posts, and then we'll put in the posts map in here. Okay, so that's all good. And if I refresh it, you'll see the posts come up here, perfectly fine, right? And we will also, let's see, we'll call this posts one so we can actually get the board at the bottom. And then what we will also do now is we will go to the users, component, which is right here. And then we'll say, okay, well, for the users, I want to loop through every single one of them and display the name. But on top of that, when I click on the user, I want to send a message upwards to say, okay, I want to display this user, basically. I want to display this user in the center. So by doing that, first off, I need to create a function at the parent level, the smart component level. The smart component level says, okay, when the user is selected from the user's component, I want to modify this here, this property here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function here called function on user click. Let's camel case this on user click. Yeah. And then I'll say, okay, well, I've retrieved the user. I'm just going to do a quick console log of the user. There we go. And I'm going to pass that function into the user's component. So on user click. There we go. So that's been passed in there. Now in my users component, I'm also going to do something here. I'm going to say, okay, well, when I click on this user, so I'm going to say on click, pass an arrow function, attrs dot on user click, and I'm going to pass in the user here like this. And check this out. So when I click on the user, there we go. The user has been displayed. Okay. Why? Because I have, at the top level anyway, said, okay, well, here is the on user click. I've passed that down as a prop basically. So that's essentially it. Now all I need to do in here is model.user equals user. And there we are. And the user is selected now. So with all of that being said, we need to let this user know that a user has been selected. So how do we do that? We simply do that by just passing in the user as a property like the others. Like I've passed user here, and I've passed a function called on user click. And I've also passed in the posts here as well. So in the same way, I'll just pass in the user like this. User equals model.user. Or to be a bit fancy, really, you could if you want to. It's a bit extra, it's a bit, long-winded, but I know some may like it at the same time. So there we go. And there we are. Make that look a bit nice and neater. So there we go. Right, so I've passed the user in, and in the users component, in the user component, again, I'll just reach out to the attributes, and I'll basically just say, okay, you know what, for now, what I want to do is I want to pass in a pre-tag that will contain the user that I have retrieved or received. So there we are, user null to. If I actually take a look in here and I click on this person, look what happens. The data updates. Okay, so that's essentially it. That's essentially how smart and dumb components work. Now, what I need to do lastly, just to kind of finish it off, would be to add an array in here. And that would be an array of elements. So the first would be the H2 to say selected user. And then the second, the second element would, so actually the second element would be the pre-tag. And there we are. So selected user is null. When I click on this, there we go. Now, null doesn't really look nice, does it? So what I could say actually is, okay, well, if attrs.user doesn't exist or is null or is falsy, then just display a p tag to say, please select a user on the left, right? Otherwise, display this data here. Now that's starting to look messy. So what I would do is I'll just say, okay, just display a function here called render user. And I'll just pass in the attrs. And the reason why I'm passing that entire attribute is so that I have access to the other functions that it may have retrieved as well. When I say it, I mean this component has retrieved. But that's essentially it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a function up here called render user. And then I'll simply just return a pre-tag. And that pre-tag contains the user. And if I just do a quick refresh as well, let me just extract the user from it. Please select a user on the left, and when I do, there we are, voila. User is being displayed. And I can even go as far as saying, okay, actually, you know what? Why not just display, I don't know, a p tag with the name of the user and a p tag with the email as well. And I'll just wrap this in backticks. And I'll just say name like that. And in here I'll just say email. There we go. So at least it looks a bit more presentable. I think I have missed something out here, which is basically this, because I need to use the array. I need to close the array. There we go. So name, Urban Howell. There we are. So that's the information, and we can get rid of this pre-tag now. And there we go. Okay, so that's essentially how you would use Mithril to retrieve data and pass information into other components now, and also communicate between the two of them and pass information upwards, as I've shown you here. So it's pretty cool. If you like this tutorial, please let me know, drop a message or a like or comment, and we'll take things from there. This is just, very, very, very little in terms of, what Mithril could do. There's so much more. There's a lot of things that could be done, such as, catching errors, handling that well, having maybe an alert function, an alert component as well. So there's so much that could be done. What I intend to do next is show you guys how you can actually create a webpack config.js file and integrate JSX as well. And you'll see how clean this would look. But I hope you liked this. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please drop it in the comment below and give us a like, and take things from there. Thank you very much, guys.